Good evening everyone and welcome to our annual general meeting for 2019-20. Council acknowledge and pay respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional and original owners and continuing custodians of this land. All persons in attendance are advised that it's Council policy to record Council meetings in accordance with Council's digital recording policy. The digital recording of this meeting will be made available to the public on Council's website. The meeting is being live streamed on Council's YouTube channel. I'd like to begin by introducing our councillors and our staff. I'll ask councillors to perhaps stand up and as I call them. Deputy Mayor Alison Jarman, Councillor Don Alexio, thank you John, Councillor Lee Murphy, Councillor Lynn Laycock, Councillor Sally Milbourne, Councillor Peter Hollister, Councillor Gerard Ennis and Councillor Leon Perry. And up here with me on the table I have our Jackie on the end who's taking our notes and minutes, our General Manager Matthew Atkins, our Deputy General Manager Jeff Griffith, our Executive Manager of People and Finance Kim Peebles and our Executive Manager of City Growth, Matthew Skirving, on the end. So thank you all for coming and thank you all for registering and doing the right thing. As you can see, we're trying to maintain our COVID safe plans in place, and I appreciate all of you making sure that you are here in time to do all of that and understand that we have rules we have to follow. So thank you for that. The annual general meeting will be conducted as far as practicable in a manner similar to an ordinary council meeting and generally align with processes of local government meeting procedure regulations. All discussion is to be addressed through the chair.
Please, Madam Chair, point of order.
Mr Nevin, I'd like you to come to...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would you like me to identify myself?
Please.
Graham Nevin,
I
145...
hadn't quite got that far, Mr Nevin.
Pardon?
I hadn't got that far.
Very well. Graham Nevin, 145 Percy Street, Devonport. Madam Chair,
Mr Nevin, one moment. Can we just check that microphones, please?
Hello? Is that better?
Thank you.
Madam Chair, as a point of order, it is submitted that you do not have the authority or power to simply announce in this manner what the rules of this AGM will be. This is out of order and should cease. There has not been any resolution regarding the new rules. There has not been any motion, nor debate, nor public consultation, nor discussion. In a nutshell, an announcement is being made without what should have gone on before. More is required than this for such an important matter as taking away electors' ability to participate in this annual general meeting. Madam Chair, State Parliament has deliberately legislated that the local government meeting procedures regulations of 2015 do not apply to an annual general meeting. Yet these rules seek to impose those very regulations on this annual general meeting. The rules proposed are couched in mandatory terms. A council can certainly adopt its own annual general meeting procedures, but this is not an appropriate way to do it. Council has a general obligation under the Local Government Act to promote, represent the interests of the community and to consult, involve and be accountable to the community. None of this is apparent with the current process. These rules have been developed without any involvement or consultation with the community, and it shows. Little thought has gone into the consequences and inconsistencies of these proposed rules, and this procedure is out of order and this meeting should not continue with it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Atkins. If you could just give...
Yeah, just to clarify, Madam Mayor, the meeting's been structured and arranged in accordance with Section 72B of the Local Government Act, and we're confident that the processes that have been put in place have been done correctly.
So I don't have to accept? No. In that case, we'll continue. Thank you. You will have an opportunity to make those comments at the end of the meeting. Thank you, Mr Garden. Mr Garden, are you moving a procedural motion or a point of order? No. I'll make a comment. Thank you.
Madam Chair, as a point of order, am I permitted to put a motion of dissent? Or are you applying the rules, the meeting regulation rules 2015, and there's no opportunity to put a motion of dissent?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please?
Am I permitted to put a motion of dissent? It wouldn't be to be fair, it wouldn't be permitted under the meeting regulations.
Mr Nevin, I've made my ruling. Thank you. Going back to my comments, all discussion is to be addressed through the chair. There will be opportunity for people to ask questions and make comment. I haven't certainly not intending to curtail that. However, the process for questions without notice will generally be in accordance with Council's public question time, as in 3 minutes at the end of the meeting. And those wishing to speak are asked to come to the lectern, as Mr Nevin did. Identify yourself and give your name and address. And I will ask you to come, as I said, to the lectern when the time comes. We do have at least one apology for this meeting. I'm not sure whether we have any others. Thank you. That will be recorded in the minutes. Thank you, Mr Janney. Were there any other apologies to be recorded? Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is, item 3 is declarations of interest in any item on this agenda. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Moving on to item 4 is confirmation of the minutes of the last annual general meeting, which was held on the 9th of December last year and were attached to the agenda. Do I have a mover, please?
Madam Chair, could I move?
Are you moving a motion?
I'm moving the motion. There is an override. I would think I need an amendment too.
You're moving a different motion than the one that's been recommended. Is that right, Mr Vellacott? I'll ask you for an amendment in a moment, Mr Vellacott. I'll come back to you.
I'm moving. I have to read.
Can I have someone who moves?
It is an actual
Thank you.
motion.
Thank you. You will have the opportunity. This is as presented in the agenda.
Point of order, we can, with all due respect to members, that if they do wish to speak, they are required to actually make a point of order if they do wish to speak. So we would follow the meeting procedures with respect to this particular meeting in doing so.
So I will ask for a mover of the recommendation, as in confirming the minutes. Councillor Murphy, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hollister. Councillor Murphy, I'll need you to speak at the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As everyone was fully aware, the minutes are there and they are a true and accurate reflection of last year's AGM.
Thank you. Councillor Hollister.
Nothing further to add.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions?
I'd like to speak against the motion.
You may. Thank you, Mr Garden. Mr Garden, I'll need you to give us your name and address,
Well,
please.
we haven't actually heard Mr Vellacott's motion,
Well, Mr
but the
Vellacott
amendment
needs
that he
to
wished
put
to
an
speak.
amendment if he chooses to do so.
Do you?
A motion with an amendment.
You take the chair. I'll come and speak to support.
Mr Vellacott, would you like to take the microphone and move your amendment, please.
Clarify the matter that I tried to do. Thank you. Mayor, due to the General Manager's failure to include my compliance...
Mr Vellacott, if you could simply move your amendment and then you'll have the opportunity to speak to it. Thank you.
Okay. That the minutes of the annual general meeting held on the 9th of December 2019, as per the 2020 AGM agenda, attachment 411, be confirmed, providing that after the last sentence has been amended by deleting the words, "The Mayor closed the meeting at 6:24 p.m. and inserting the words, "so as the last sentence shall read, the Mayor, contrary to the Council's Code of Conduct, knowing that several ratepayers electors wished to introduce further business and a procedural motion was being put, abruptly declared the meeting closed at 6:24 p.m. Need a second.
That is your amendment, Mr Vellacott? That is your amendment?
That is the amendment with the motion.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Mr Garnham? Mr Vellacott, you have the opportunity to speak to the amendment.
Mayor, this is how I wanted to put it in the first place. Due to the General Manager's failure to include my complying notice of motion in regard to amend the minutes in the agenda for this evening's meeting, I hereby request I be permitted to submit the following. My original motion of notice was based on the 2019 Annual General Meeting unconfirmed minutes, which were included and circulated in Council's agenda of the 16th of December 2019. I note that the relevant section which I referred to of the minutes in this evening's agenda, reference page 7 of the attachments 411, has been changed from there being no further business, the Mayor declared the meeting closed at 6:24 p.m. to the Mayor closed the meeting at 6:24 p.m.
Thank you, Mr Vellacott.
Yes.
Mr Garnham is the seconder. Would you like to speak to it?
Malcolm Gardam, 4 Beaumont Drive, Mundetta. I'll just premise this a little bit by the fact that Mr Vellacott put in a motion that was compliant and it was omitted from the agenda to do with, as he's just read out. We were advised in the notice of annual general meeting that motions had to be on notice, but yet Council elected to leave out this motion of Mr Vellacott.
Mr Garnham, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes. As found by the Code of Conduct panel, the action of the Mayor in closing last year's AGM was an appalling display of self-interest. After nearly 3 months of seeking answers as to why the Mayor could legitimately do what she did in closing a meeting around and over a ratepayer trying to put a motion that had been flagged previously in the meeting, and then a procedural motion, the panel not only reduced the reasons given by the Mayor to the status of excuses, but also found that the Mayor had likely closed the meeting because she considered to continue may have caused her personal embarrassment. This was an abhorrent display of abusing her position as chairperson for personal advantage. That is, to avoid perceived embarrassment. For that reason alone, it is not good enough to have the official minutes not record the events of the AGM accurately and fully. I urge those in attendance to support Mr Vellacott's motion.
Thank you, Mr Garnham.
Madam Chair, if you may, I support the amended motion. It accurately reflects what transpired at the last annual general meeting. And I'd like to add, Madam Chair, that in my view you should have vacated the chair when this motion was being dealt with.
Thank you for your advice, Mr Nevin. Are there any other speakers? I will ask Mr Atkins for a comment of
If I can just
clarification.
clarify, Madam Mayor, the comment made by Mr Gardam in regard to the minutes, the Act's very clear that Section 72B, Clause 7 requires the General Manager to keep minutes of the AGM. I'd take that to include presenting them at the next AGM. As recorded in the agenda, the minutes were presented for noting back in December, and now they're presented to this meeting for adoption. Given the events that unfolded through the year, there was that change made in regard to the closure of the meeting, and it's certainly the General Manager's job now to bring that back and to put that recommendation on this agenda. It's not a matter of motions being raised from the public.
Thank you. Were there any other comments? Mr Vellacott. I'll ask Mr Vellacott to close, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing further to add other than to say to the electors here present that I'm concerned if the minutes are not a true and correct recording of that particular meeting, that is the AGM 2019. Thank you, and I ask you now to put my motion with the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just clarify that this is to vote to make the amendment the new motion, and then whether it's won or lost, the motion will be put as either the amendment or as it looks in the agenda at present. I will ask for a show of hands, please. That's the new motion at this point. All those in favour of the amendment, would you please raise your hands? I think I've got someone counting those. Thank you. All those against the amendment as it's shown? $32. Thank you. The amendment is lost, so we go back to the original motion as it stands, and I will ask Councillor Murphy to close. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Whilst I will acknowledge in closing there was a process throughout the year, and I think I mentioned at the meeting that the Mayor did apologise in relation to the actions of at the last general meeting, hence the reason why I made the decision on what I have done, and I'll stand by that. I consider it closed.
Thank you. I will put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. The motion is carried. Moving on to item 5 on the agenda is a presentation of the annual report, and the General Manager is going to give an overview of the 2019-20 annual report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the opportunity to provide a brief overview on the annual report. The annual report's available on the web page, and if you haven't already, I'd encourage people to have a look at it and take the time to read it. There's a copy up on the screen, and I'll just quickly point out some of the highlights. You'll find we've done a revamp this year, realigned the annual report to try and make it more presentable, structured the report in a way so it picks up the 5 key strategic goals that Council have, and put the relevant items under each of those goals. So it starts off with a section about Council and then goes through those 5 high-level goals. Each is colour-coded and you can refer to the civic section. Certainly 2020 will forever be defined as the year that the COVID-19 pandemic rocked the world. It's been certainly been a year of two halves, and business as usual through until about February, and then the pandemic hit. And I'm not sure that anyone sort of predicted that it would escalate so quickly, and the challenges that we'd face as a community. But the northwest coast of Tasmania became the epicentre, the national epicentre of the virus during April, and the city effectively experienced an unprecedented 3-week lockdown, which forced the closure of our commercial, hospitality and retail sectors. As a result, Council had to respond quickly and adapt to the circumstances, which were literally changing on a daily basis. It's balancing those public health risks without overreacting and implementing unnecessary restrictions was one of the hardest parts of the early stages of the pandemic. Council set up a COVID-19 response committee, and they were established to identify and quickly implement support measures for the community. This included initiatives such as waiving community and sporting club fees, hardship assistance to ratepayers, waiving parking fees and food licence renewals, and providing financial assistance grants to assist with the recovery. Fortunately, Council had the financial capacity to absorb the inevitable budget implications that came as a result of the COVID pandemic, and made those decisions in the best interest of the community. Council was established under the provisions of the Local Government Act 1993, and it's made up of 9 elected members. Our current councillors were elected in October 2018, and are just over halfway through their first terms. Certainly can be a thankless task. Being a councillor, you're always available to the public, no matter what the time or day is. And I just take this opportunity, Mayor, to say thank you to you and to the councillors for the tireless work that you do for this community. And also, my first year as General Manager, I thank you for the trust and support you've shown me with the appointment during the year. Our strategic planning framework, so page 14 of our annual report outlines the strategic planning framework that Council follows. So we have our 21-year long-term strategic plan, 2009 through to 2030. I guess that was birthed out of a weekend planning session over in the East Devonport Rec Centre back in 2009. And I know some people in this room were here at that forum. So we're now roughly halfway through that 21-year plan. So the strategic plan feeds down into our sort of 5 and 10-year timeframes, asset plans, financial strategies, and that gets reflected in the annual plan actions that get adopted each year in the budget. And then the annual report, which is what we're considering tonight, is an important part of the accountability, with progress on each of those actions being reported and flowing right back to the strategic plan. The organisational structure had some changes during the year. We've got a 4-person executive team. We've got support there. Jeff Griffiths has become our Deputy General Manager. Jeff's now had a couple of years in local government, previously coming from an executive level experience at an ASX 200 listed company. Kim Peebles is our Executive Manager of People and Finance, and during the year took on a more direct role in overseeing the council's finances. And we were joined in March by Matt Skirving. So Matt's previously had experience with the Hobart City Council and the Launceston City Council, and prior to that in the public sector, and has joined us as our Executive Manager of City Growth. So certainly, as an executive team supported by a very strong management team, and I'd say hold their own against any in the state. Perhaps I'm biased, but in regard to staff, we have roughly 180 staff, which make up 146.2 full-time equivalent jobs. Just of note there, our injury frequency rate was something we focused on through the year. It was certainly too high. Previously it was a rating of 52.6. We've been able to reduce that back to 17. We certainly make no apology for the fact, though, that our target there is 0, that we We aim for zero harm to our employees, and we'll continue to work on that, but it's good to see that downward trend, which is also reflected in our workers' comp costs. So that provides you with a brief overview of council, and then the report steps through those 5 high-level goals with relevant information under each. It includes the actions and the progress against each of those. So the first goal is living lightly on our environment. So council's been active in improving our environmental sustainability, activities, a number of activities in that area, including partnering with community groups such as the Friends of Don Reserve, empowering those groups to take action in that space. We've got a number of waste minimisation strategies that we work through with Dalverton Waste Management Authority. Our council's a 43% owner in Dalverton, and they're certainly regarded as a leader in the waste sector. We're also been active at a regional and state level in lobbying for action around climate change and environmental matters, and in particular, council during the year supported a motion by the Local Government Association to acknowledge a climate emergency. The second key goal that council has is building a unique city. Living City continues to be a focus for the council as we start to see the benefits of the early investment in this once-in-a-generation transformational project, seeing increasing business confidence, growth, development, and importantly, new jobs. Most obvious this year has been the start of construction of the $40 million fully privately funded hotel. And along with the $17 million waterfront park, this construction activity over the next 18 months could not come at a better time for the city as it recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's said that each dollar spent on construction flows back through the local economy 2.5 times. So certainly fortunate at this point in history to have that 57 million of construction activity just ramping up in our CBD. Council's previously acknowledged that the Providore Place Food Pavilion has not yet reached its potential, but Council during the year took direct action to end an unsuccessful lease agreement, and by taking back operational control and looking to activate both the commercial and community components of the venue as the COVID restrictions are lifted. Apart from Living City, there was a total of 67 other capital projects completed during the year, a value of 14.85 million. One there I might just highlight, certainly not big by dollar terms, but certainly an important one, the memorial that Council constructed out at the Mersey Vale Memorial Park. So we put in a special children's memorial. It provides a special place for parents to reflect and remember children they've lost. Also continue to invest in our pathway network with maintaining our existing pathways and continuing to build that network, and most significantly there was the Devonport section of the coastal pathway that will go through between Ambleside and Bells Parade. Development applications, we saw an increase this year with 226 DAs being approved within the city, total value of $113 million, up from 184 the previous year. In part, that was due to the increasing regulation around visitor accommodation and the need for some of those facilities to obtain approvals, but it was also an indicator of increased investment confidence in the city. And asset management, of course, remains a key function of council, and I think in a lot of ways council could be described as an asset-based business. We maintain and operate community assets with a combined value of over $500 million. So goal 3 is around growing a vibrant economy and, vibrant community, growing a vibrant community. So council run or sponsored events were again an essential part of the community fabric. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to sit here next to you, Mayor, and say the same thing. But certainly over the last 12 months, we've seen Devonport Jazz again be a success for the city, headed up by James Morrison. The Christmas Parade, Christmas Carols, New Year's Eve event were all successfully transitioned to a new location, I guess due to the construction that was underway in Roundhouse Park. Goal 4 was building quality of life. So during the last financial year, it was 47 citizens were presented with citizenship by the Mayor. The Australia Day award winners this year included Mrs Pat Kent, who was awarded the Citizen of the Year for her tireless community contribution. Caitlin Walker was named the Young Citizen of the Year, and the Mersey Yacht Club won the Community Event of the Year for the Oceanic Laser Championships. February also saw the visit by the HMAS Stewart to its ceremonial home port of Devonport. They undertook a freedom of entry march through the city. And then Goal 5 is practising excellence in governance. So good governance is something Council's focused on and certainly has implemented a number of actions during the year that were a result of this AGM last year, and looking to ways to improve openness and transparency beyond the practice of many local government authorities and certainly well beyond what's required under statutory requirements. Council adopted a good governance policy. From a financial perspective, I think it was fair to say up until the March forecast we were looking at achieving budget, and then things went south from there with the onset of COVID. The financial position rapidly deteriorated in the last 3 months of the year, with a net operating result for the year ending 30th of June 2020 being a deficit of 1.3 million. However, fortunately, Council has the capacity to sustain this loss with sufficient cash reserves, I think the fifth highest in the state at June 19, and is also fortunate to be in a sound long-term financial position. Council continued to meet its financial obligations during the year, including debt repayments, and debt was reduced from 51.8 million down to a planned 50 million as of 30th of June 2020. Net assets of Council, or net worth, I guess, grew by 10 million from 555 million in 18-19 to 565 million at June 30, 2020. The annual report also includes full disclosure of tenders and contracts, along with all grants, donations, gifts and benefits that Council's made through the year. The summary on page 59 highlights that Council provided a total of $530,000 in community support and benefit during the year. And just on that governance theme, Council did commence on a digital transformation program during 2018, and has already led to some great operational efficiencies, along with some improved service delivery and improved customer service. And certainly to say that COVID gave that an injection in the arm, a shot along, I guess, with the take-up of online forms and access to Council. But what we are seeing now is many customers starting to access and interact with Council on a 24/7 basis at a time that suits them. And we'll continue to see this transformation over coming years. So to complete the annual report, there's a full set of financial statements, and they've provided us an attachment along with the unqualified audit opinion that's been provided from the Tasmanian Audit Office. So Madam Mayor, I trust this provides a brief overview of the annual report. There's been a number of questions and submissions received, and they've been included as attachments to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Atkins. As Mr Atkins said, there were a number of submissions, and my glasses on so I can read what I'm saying, submissions and questions, and they have been included in this agenda together with responses where required from the General Manager, and I would ask for a mover of the recommendation that those be noted, please. Thank you. Is Mr Goodwin? How are you, Mr Goodwin? Very well. Do I have a seconder? Ms Sayers. Mr Goodwin, would you like to speak to the motion? No, nothing further to add, Madam Mayor. Thank you. Ms Sayers? Any other comments? Questions? No? I'll ask Mr Goodwin to close. Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, sorry. Raise your hand as well, please. Gotta raise my hand. $35, thank you. Those against? Please raise your hand. Are there any against the motion? No? The motion's carried, thank you. Item 7 are motions on notice, and item 7.1 is a motion from Mr Vellacott.
Just have some clarity, and we've tried to do it last year, just some clarity of when you'll take comments, when you'll take questions.
I will take the notices of motion as they sit now, and then in general business I will ask for any comments, questions.
Comments will be in general business.
And questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Garden. Mr Vellacott, item 7.1 is your notice of motion. I'm assuming is as read. I'm sorry? Would you like to come to the microphone? Is the motion as it's presented, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to read the motion, the actual motion, if I may.
Mr Vellacott, I'm not going to allow you to read the motion as it's in the agenda. If it's a different motion or if it's slightly worded differently, that's okay. But I'm not going to allow you to read the 4 pages of the motion.
Thank you. Well, it wasn't quite 4 pages of the motion, it was with the other there. Can I speak to the motion, Mayor?
You may, when you get a seconder, you may speak to the motion.
Okay, sir.
So
Yes,
the motion is as it sits?
Yes, well, I'll move it then as you require.
Thank you, Mr Vellacott.
As read.
Do I have a seconder for your motion? Mr Garden? In that case, would you like to speak to your motion, Mr Vellacott? And
Yes.
a reminder that
Thank
there
you.
is a limited time.
I take it everyone has a copy of the agenda, so I'm reading from page 10 of the support. Ratepayers, Mayor, ratepayers are now fully responsible for a total council debt of approximately $50 million and are exposed to real possibility of increased rates or reduced services in the future. Instead of being protected, they have been let down by council members who are paid by ratepayers to provide proper and diligent duty of care in their decision-making. The current Mayor, Annette Rockcliffe, Deputy Mayor at the time of approving Stage 1, now tells us in relation to Providore Place rent that it was probably, to be honest, optimistic, with the whole sorry saga described by another councillor as a schmozzle. I suggest, as pointed out to council at the time, that it was a fantasy, and considering the litany of what I suggest were wild statements, a better description would be grossly exaggerated and or delusional, in fact, not deliberately deceptive. It is absolutely apparent if council had applied its own funding model criteria, which were published to the community, good governance principles, as noted by the Auditor-General, plus proper due diligence, the food pavilion now known as Providore Place would not have been built. Council is on record as stating the financial risks with Living City are significant, and council risks enormous reputational damage if the master plan is not implemented. Other evidence are council's avoidance in answering questions, etc., relating to the Living City could be given. However, because of time restrictions, I am unable to do so. In my opinion, they, then the acting general manager, acting mayor, and those councillors at the time had concern for just their own reputations and none for ratepayers or some staff who may have been placed in invidious situations because of them being privy to concealment that was taking place. Mayor, it is for these reasons listed that I have moved this motion to seek an apology. Others may be of the opinion and say those responsible should resign. However, I leave that for them to make that decision. Mayor and councillors responsible as outlined in my motion, and what I have said, it would, I suggest, be pertinent to this time for you and others who are mentioned in this to refrain from voting. I therefore request the Secretary of the meeting to record all that has been written and said and include in the minutes of this annual general meeting and the agenda for the November 2020 meeting. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr Velcott. Mr Garden is the seconder of the motion.
I'm not sure there's a lot more really to say. We've all witnessed Providore Place through the media. Most of it's been through the media, like the disclosures of the waived rent, the $200,000 write-off of rent owing. It's just been one sorry saga, and to date there really hasn't been an apology from council for its handling of that, in particular the people who were councillors at the time that this lease was entered into around October 2016. The promises were great. They were promoted regularly through the media, and then we've watched it all unfold in over the last 4 years, and it's not good. Add insult to injury, when the first lease was surrendered, wasn't terminated, it was surrendered, the council, in its wisdom, went out and renegotiated another lease with the same entity with some $200,000 still owing, and that was then promoted as the new beginning that was going to make a return and allow everyone to prosper in Providore Place, and lo and behold, it was terminated by council within 2 months, supposedly for non-payment of rent. I think the whole thing is somewhat of a disgrace. No legal advice taken, no answers why it wasn't taken. I think an apology is well and truly due to the people of Devonport, and I'd ask everyone to support the motion by Mr Velcott. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Garden. Are there any other speakers? Deputy Mayor Jarman.
Thank you, Mayor. If the gentleman that put this motion up want an apology from me, I will apologise for the 2016 lease, for example. But this is such a convoluted notice of motion, I can't agree with all the claims in there. I can agree with some of them, but not all of them. If they were all separated, I could look at them at each as a generalised view and decide on each one. But because it's all together, I can't support it. I have explained this to Mr Velcott yesterday in a phone call. You want an apology for 2016? No problem from me at all. But I'd like to see us move forward after this AGM. I would like to see us get on with business. What has happened in the past, we've lost a GM over. What has happened in the past was regrettable. What has happened in the past has been talked about. I would like to see the gentleman look at the future of what we've got here, what a beautiful city we live in, what a wonderful region we have, and how to move forward and achieve things. If you've got the problem of not knowing what goes on behind closed doors, run in the next election. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Mr Mobbs, please.
Eric Mobbs, 5 Nola Crescent, Wyandotte, and also President of the Devonport Chamber of Commerce. I agree an apology is needed, but not from the councillors, from the group here that continue to waste time, that has assassinated, with all due respect to the current General Manager, assassinated probably the best General Manager this city has had in the 20 years I've been here, and the time wasting that goes on. Every one of these items mentioned here I've seen time and time again at council meetings. You've wasted hundreds, if not thousands, of staff hours continually answering the same questions. I agree with Councillor Jarman that what's needed here is to draw a line in the sand, stop the rubbish, use your undoubted energies to get on and move this city forward. It's crying out for some leaders. You appear to be what you think are leaders. get on with it and get this council moving forward and get this city belonging where it should be. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mobbs. Are there any other speakers? Mr Goodwin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Certainly when we read through Mr Vellicott's motion, there's quite a number of issues in relation to that. And of course, many of them have been discussed over the years, certainly in my time and since then. And I must say, and I don't think there'd be anybody in this room that would sit back and say that they're overjoyed with the way Providore Place turned out. It certainly didn't turn out as well as we expected at the time, but what's done is done. We can't undo it. We need to go forward and do the best we possibly can to get it rolling. One thing I do take umbrage with, and the item 4, the farrago of exaggerated unsubstantiated claims as per the Living City Master Plan sheet. And one thing I will say, the alderman of the day didn't get up one morning and decide, well, we'll go off and spend millions of dollars on Living City. It was something that evolved over a long time, long before the ones that, and I look to you, Malcolm and Bob, before you was even very much interested at all in council. It was, a lot of work was actually done on it. And I will certainly point out that we sat in workshops and we had submissions put to us, and it's no great secret. Target put a submission to us for extended retail activity in this area. I mean, and we know what's happened to Target. It's gone by the wayside, and we didn't know that. No one knew what was going to take place as in the retail market going forward. But what were we to do as the alderman of the day? Were we going to say to Target, look, sorry, we can't accommodate you? Of course not. So we listened to everything, and they were genuine in what they wanted to do within Devonport. It didn't come to fruition, as we well know. Same too with Big W, with what they flagged in the first place, but it didn't come to fruition. But we would be in dereliction of our duty to sit back and say, well, we don't want to talk to you, we don't want to listen to you. We listened and we acted, and at the end of the day, Living City is not finished. There's quite a major project going on over there, and that will bring it to its finish, and we will see the jobs in the city. But absolutely, Providore Place, I grant you, hasn't turned out the way it should have, and I don't think there'd be anybody in this room that could say that it's been a success at this point in time. But give it time. Give it time, and it will make it. But we just need to stick at it and persevere, just like you people persevere with your continual questioning when you come to council. You've been persevering for as long as I would say, probably in the vicinity of about 8 years, 6 years, in that area, but quite a good deal of perseverance. If you can put that perseverance, and everybody else puts that perseverance into making Living City what it should be, we will have a very successful entity. Thank you very much. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Goodwin. Mr Murphy, Councillor Murphy, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll probably go out and support the previous two speakers in relation to, if COVID's taught us one thing, and that is that sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, and not everyone's going to agree with that. I suppose I have been a primary driver behind holding council to account within and behind closed doors in relation to dealing with Providore Place. I make no bones about that. But it has now come down to a time where we have to move forward. We just can't continue to go down the path. And if anything, March this year, when the decision was made to enter into a new lease agreement, it was a very challenging decision to make, but one that we had to make on the advice that we were given. Now, in this motion, Mr Vellicott, Mr Vellicott's done a lot of work over a long period of time, but now I think for the greater good, it is going to be time to move forward. as Mr Goodwin has just stated, Providore Place hasn't worked. We acknowledge that. The General Manager has acknowledged that, and the previous General Manager took the honourable step and resigned because of it. I think that there is also a catalyst for us to move forward. For me, the last 2 years of being on council at various points has been conflicting, but more importantly, we have now gotten to the stage where council has unified and we need to keep that momentum going. So I will not be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Are there any other comments? Thank you. Mr Marshall, come forward.
Greg Marshall from 11 Ambleside Place, East Devonport.
Thank you,
First, I'd like to congratulate the council on their performance for the year in what has been a challenging year. I came here tonight with wanting to say something and do it in a very soft manner, but to be honest with the behaviours here tonight and the same worn-out rhetoric from the last couple of years, it's made me actually a little bit angry. And I think, as and echoing what a couple of the previous speakers have said, it is time to stop. It's time to support this this council, because, as someone else said, look out that window. You know, look at the good stuff that's going on. You know, Providore Place is a very small percentage of this whole project. And anyone that tells me that they delivered a perfect project actually didn't deliver anything, because if it was a perfect project, it means you didn't start it. Nothing's ever perfect. The other thing is we're getting these calls for further inquiries. Inquiries cost money. We talk about wasting ratepayers' money. Every time we have an inquiry, it's a direct cost to the ratepayer.
Thank you, Mr Gardam. I was about to remind... Thank you, Mr Gardam.
Sorry,
I'll ask you to address the motion in front
all right.
of us. Thank you, Mr
Well,
Marshall.
I guess my point is you know, the time has come that we've got to put this stuff behind us and just go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Marshall. Are there any other comments? Ms Clare?
Jenny Clare, ratepayer of Devonport. I'd just like to make the point that people who
I need you to speak up a little bit.
Oh,
please,
sorry.
Or speak into the microphone.
People who have criticised some of the actions of the council being urged to put that aside, draw a line in the sand and move forward. And I would just like to point out that we can't actually support Providore Place at the moment because there's very little happening there. Now, during the time of the lockdown and businesses being held back by COVID, you know, that was a very difficult time. And as we've come out of that, we have seen all the other restaurants in Devonport reopen and do really well. We've got Verona, Valentino's, Prema's, and others, all have opened and come back. And with, you know, extended menus, beautiful renovations. Now, we're being urged to support Providore Place, but what can we actually support at the moment? Because there isn't a market on, there's barely, you know, very short opening hours for various things, and that's just a point I would like to make, that something needs to happen for us to be able to support it, especially in regard to Providore Place.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions? Mr Martin, and then Mr Bramage.
Steve Martin, 26 Tugger Road, Devonport. I won't be supporting the motion, and it's not because I was involved with the start of the Living City back in 2012, but because of the work that's been done about Living City. It's a concept that's been tried by this community for many decades to lift our community and put it back on the map. As time as Mayor and Alderman and leading up to that, Devonport was stagnant, we were losing businesses, shops were shut, and we're losing employment and people were moving away. Council set about trying to do something about that, and they set out by putting out to the whole community what their idea was, how we might move forward. And we asked the community for feedback. We actually went to Ulverston and as far as Sheffield to ask for the community feedback and ideas which we can feed into a master plan. We then put that master plan out in about, and I'm a little bit fuzzy on the dates, but 2014, for the community to have a look at that as well, and then also provide feedback. During this time, there was a huge number of meetings and workshops that the aldermen went through and the staff went through, and the information that was supplied. And part of that, of course, was Providore Place. And yes, I admit, Providore Place hasn't hit its straps and was difficult. But Living City is a 3-stage plan. It all interlinks, it all affects one another. It's a 10-year plan. And we need that 10-year plan to eventuate. And then, and only then, can we look back and say, no, it was a waste of time, it was a waste of money. But only then can we do that. We've got to be able to give it its straps. The hotel that's being built now was also linked to Providore Place and to the Arts Centre.
Mr Martin, I'll ask you to address the motion as it stands, please. I understand where you're going, but we need to address the motion.
Well, I am addressing the motion, Mayor, in regards to Council does not need to apologise for putting its best foot forward to try and help the community, to try and create employment and investment into the community, and to keep our children in our community and build it up to something that we can all be proud of and change it.
Thank you, Mr Gardam. I'm chairing this meeting. Mr Martin,
Thank you,
you've already been warned. Thank you.
Thank you, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mr Bramage.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Rod Bramage, 9 Chalmers Lane, and Senior Vice President of the Devonport Chamber of Commerce. So I'm, as is the Chamber of Commerce, against the motion. We can't change the past. We can do a lot about the future. Let's move on.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Ms Sayers, you've already, no? Thank you.
Sylvia Sayers, 162 Upper George Street, Devonport. I would like to let everyone know that I won't be supporting this motion. I was president of the Chamber of Commerce back in the days when we had countless community forums, information sessions, and from my point of view, this was the best consultation process I've ever witnessed for a development. I must say I attended a lot of those events, and I can't really remember seeing any of the people that are very concerned about what happened and what actually was decided. I feel the community was consulted, the community spoke, and from a personal point of view, I'm the General Manager at Radio 7AD and CFM. We rely completely on the well-being of the Devonport business community and community as a whole. We've served this community for 84 years, and I have never seen...
Ms Sayers, again, I will ask you to speak to the motion, please.
I would just like to draw attention to this continual criticism in this motion. Has this type of negativity contributed to the demise of Providore Place? I don't think that this type of regurgitating of negativity actually is a positive thing to help Providore Place. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? I will ask Mr Vellacott to close the debate, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Just I've heard what has been said, yes, and I too would like to see the thing completed. The debate on this completed. To Mr Goodwin, I don't agree with you. There were no firm commitments from Big W and any other large businesses in regards to Providore Place. To Mrs Sayers, I did attend as many as possible and wrote submissions as many times as required in regards to what was going on with Living City. I just conclude, we could go on again, but I will just conclude, yes, let's move forward, but please, let's be truthful about what we are being told and cut out all the secrecy that has and does go on in regard to Providore Place. I've been speaking specifically, or my motion was specifically tonight, towards Providore Place. I have never once actually said I was against Living City per se. I ask you now to put the motion. Okay.
Thank you. I will now put the motion. Those in favour of the notice of motion as tabled by Mr Vellacott, please raise your hand. (13). And those against the motion, please raise your hand. (35). The motion is lost. Thank you. Item 7.2 is a notice of motion from Mr Graham Nevin as tabled. Mr Nevin? Not quite. Okay. Would you like to come to the microphone, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion that I sent in is different from what you have in front of you, only in relation to the lettering. You'll see that at item 3, it says there was a report made public apart from item A, is a capital A below. Mm-hmm. The lettering I used were all capitals, and at the moment it doesn't make sense. So perhaps if you change where it says 3 with the report made public apart from item, if you use a lowercase a, then it'll make sense.
Fair enough. So other than that, it's as it
That
stands?
is, yes.
Do we have a seconder for Mr Nevin's motion, please? Mr Gardner, you may speak to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this motion is for an independent inquiry to find out how we ended up with the Providore Place matter and to report what happened and why. Is it a big deal? Yes, it is. We're not talking peanuts here. It's so bad that Council will not report what the Providore Place losses are in its annual statement. Council goes to the extraordinary length of saying Providore Place is not a significant business activity, so it does not have to put the details of the losses in the annual report. Council even applies special accounting and valuation methods to inflate the carrying value of Providore Place over and above the Valuer General's valuation. Millions in revenue have been lost. What was meant to be a net income stream of $4 million over 10 years to help repay the debt has vanished. There has been a $5 to $6 million loss in value on the building. So if you say you're worried about how much it's going to cost for an investigation, just have a think about that. Already there is talk of it being a community asset, which is code for it being a loss-making building forever. Look, bits of what happened can be put together like a big jigsaw puzzle. but there are chunks missing as to what's happened. Council has severely limited the time I can speak, prevented me from going into detail, but let me say this in summary. Providore Place would not have been built if Council had applied its own funding model criteria. The head lease, the whole financial foundation on which Providore Place has been built, has crumbled into dust. The 2016 Council did not transfer the risk of the venture as promised. Instead, it remained with Council. In simple terms, this means Council took a $10 million punt on a risky, speculative, commercial property venture, and it has lost. The head lease failed to transfer the risk. Now, some of the holes in the picture are, how did this happen and who did what? Was it a matter of Council knowing all along, or not wanting to know, that the head lease was deficient, but they proceeded anyway? Did the 2016 Council really not want a lawyer to look at the head lease? Or was the 2016 Council led to believe a lawyer had looked at it when one had not? Another way of looking at it is this. Did the councillors receive good advice but refuse to follow it? Or did the 2016 councillors receive bad advice and simply rubber stamp it? Or were some councillors misled? That's basically what this motion seeks to answer. Now, you might be wondering why there's a reference to good faith in the motion. Well, under section 341 of the Local Government Act, a councillor enjoys an immunity from liability if he or she acts in good faith. So the question arises, did the 2016 councillors act in good faith? Well, at the moment, how can anyone possibly know? Council will not let anyone look at the information to check. Every step of the way, Council has strived to withhold information about Providore Place. Every decision that Council has made about Providore Place has been in secret. Now, one 2016 councillor who spoke out about it, just one decision on Providore Place, was quickly prosecuted. Councillors who want to speak out cannot for fear of prosecution. Isn't it fair, sensible, reasonable to check whether the 2016 councillors acted in good faith? And if they didn't, then look to them to contribute. I agree it is hard when some of them are on the current council, and they may be your friends, but that doesn't mean it should not at least be considered. Why is it simply assumed that the people of Devonport, many on low, fixed incomes, should pay for the losses without even inquiring whether there is any other avenue? Thank you.
Mr Gardner was the seconder of the motion.
I support the motion, and I wish to add that the people of Devonport are worthy of knowing what has happened with Providore Place. For too long, council's treated us like mushrooms and fed us the proverbial and kept us in the dark, all to prevent discovery of what happened at Providore Place, all to prevent us checking whether councillors did their jobs. Consider this. The Auditor-General, in his limited investigation and report, described the head lease as appearing to be missing a number of standard lease clauses. Despite the then Deputy General Manager, now the General Manager, telling us in December 2016 that the revenue the council received on the food pavilion was guaranteed through the head lease arrangement and removed the council's exposure to financial risk. The projected return was $4 million over a 10-year term.
Mr Gardam, I'll ask you to speak directly to the motion, please.
Yeah, I am. I formally asked the Mayor whether she had read and understood the head lease before approving it. Her answer was yes. Does this mean the Mayor at the time of approving the head lease knew that standard clauses were missing from it? Don't the people of Devonport to know why that decision was made? Why our interests weren't apparently protected? This is what this motion seeks to answer. I've asked many questions and been criticised for it. But let me say this, after 4 years of questions, I cannot get a straight answer out of Council regarding the Providore Place lease and why Council approved it. Council doesn't want that head lease and the advice about it to see the light of day. There is always an excuse. As each one is shown to be invalid, up pops another one. Some may suggest the Auditor-General has already looked at this. This is nonsense. The AG has not looked at the matters included in this motion. The AG has not investigated and reported what actually happened or why Council decided not to get legal advice. The AG did not investigate and report who made the decision not to get legal advice. The AG conducted a very limited scope investigation, mainly about governance and procurement processes. The AG certainly did not investigate whether Council could recover Providore Place losses from anyone. The AG is primarily an accountant. It is not his area to consider recovery of damages or whether councillors have acted in good faith with the meaning of Section 341 of the Local Government Act. This motion seeks to get those answers, and the people of Devonport deserve to have those answers rather than the evasiveness that we've seen for 4 years. I urge all in attendance to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Gardam. Are there any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Mr Nevin, if that's all right. Mr Nevin, Part B of your motion, whether the 2016 councillors acted in good faith, obviously includes myself. There are others in the room that it includes. Do you want us to leave the room and not vote on the motion?
That's not for Mr Nevin to decide. Thank you.
I can ask the question, though. I can ask the question.
The question's been asked, Madam Mayor. I didn't think that I would need to have to answer it. I thought it would have been obvious that all current councillors that were part of the 2016 council have a conflict of interest and ought to have left the room without me even saying it.
Thank you. I just wanted you to say it. So I will declare an interest and leave the room. Thank you.
You should have done that before we started the debate.
I've decided to
Thank
do that
you.
now. Thank you.
Can you record that, please? Are there any other speakers? I will. Thank you, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I might answer some of these questions. Did the 2016 councillors act in good faith when granting the head lease in relation to Providore Place? I think categorically you're going to get an answer of yes. Did they do it wrongly?
He's entitled to have the floor the same as you did, Mr Nevin. I will draw him to a close if I think he's...
Thank you, Mayor. Did they act naively? I'll say probably yes. The issue is that there's been a number of them in relation to this, and I suppose I'm a bit conflicted in relation to this, but I think, again, as I stated earlier, realistically, what are we going to achieve? What's going to be our end goal? I think that's the point in relation to speaking against this motion. As much as, you know, a result's not going to provide the ratepayers of Devonport with any real tangible benefit. Unfortunately, what's happened has happened. I have probably been one of the most vocal against it within council in relation to dealing with the situation around the head lease. We have taken considerable legal advice, and again I'll go back to my earlier statement in March this year. When the cost that was associated with that legal advice over this period of time was made known to us, at that point in time it was time to say enough's enough. We can't continue to keep throwing good money after no net result. Providore Place has been a fundamental failure. We acknowledge that in the short term. It will take fundamental change. Yes, I know I'm speaking off the motion. Will an inquiry provide closure to what's happened in 2016 with the councillors? I believe that it would be very, very difficult for there to be a successful prosecution in relation to finding out whether councillors acted or did not act in good faith.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Are there any other comments? Mr. Vellacott?
Thank you, Mayor. Just firstly, in reply to Councillor Murphy, what are we going to achieve? I think we'll achieve plenty. It will be, I think, a catalyst to show throughout Tasmania and in the local government circles that the council have got to just be a little bit more diligent and more so actually truthful to ratepayers, so something like this never ever occurs again. Come there. I'll go back now in speaking in support to the rest of Mr. Graham Nevin's motion. Thank you. Given the amounts involved, people really do deserve to know what happened in regard to Providore Place and why. It is not a good look for this council at all. It seems to spend a lot of time and energy trying to prevent information about Providore Place from being exposed. We simply can't trust council to provide a full account, so an inquiry needs to be done by someone completely independent of council, as well as someone who is independent of the local government division and local government association of Tasmania, because both advise council. And dear oh dear, haven't there been some tales that could be told about the local government division. Some people might be getting tired of hearing about Providore Place for those who would like Providore Place to be over and done with. My response is, well, this could have been dealt with a year or more ago, but somebody shut the meeting down. Indeed, this could have been sorted out years ago if council had not tried to cover it up, conceal it all. As has been said, bits of this picture have emerged with the passage of time, but a lot of questions still remain unanswered. Most people, ratepayers in particular, would like to know what was actually wrong with the head lease, what bits were missing. 2, if anyone reads it, it is obvious bits are missing. 3, is there something in the head lease that suggests the tenant that was not at fault if rent was not paid? And if there was something, why would council proceed? 5, did council make any inquiry at all regarding how the tenant had the financial ability to pay the rent? And I think there's the crux of the matter. Who prepared the head lease? Aren't they responsible for at least some of the loss? 8, did the 2016 council know the head lease did not protect council's position but press on regardless to take a punt? 9, why would council not want to know what a lawyer thought of the lease? I certainly would like to know why and whom a decision was made not to get any legal advice about the contents of the head lease. I urge all electors to vote in favour of Mr Nevin's motion. Let's try to get some truthful answers so we can put this to rest, as I've said that before. Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
ask
Mr
you to put...
Delacote. Are there any other speakers? I'll ask Mr Nevin to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In response, there has nothing been said which really detracts from the arguments for this motion. Mr Murphy is confident that the council has acted in good faith. Well, that's great. Tell us why. That's the thing about it. People aren't being told what happened and why. Council has persistently and consistently evaded answering the real questions, and people are prevented from speaking out. And that's why there needs to be an inquiry and the report made public so that what happened and why can be determined. Then the matter can be dealt with and then we can move on. I agree we should be moving on, but surely we find out what happened and why so that it doesn't happen again. If there's no problem, as Mr Murphy suggests, then there's no reason to hide the information and to prevent people speaking out about Providore Place. Look, it boils down to this, and you need to have a think about it. If you want to keep what actually happened at Providore Place a secret, if you do, and you want to prevent accountability and keep the people of Devonport in the dark, then you'll vote against this motion. But if you believe that the people of Devonport deserve to know what actually happened and why the 2016 council acted as it did, and that the recovery of the losses at least be considered, then you should vote in favour of the motion. It really comes down to this. Do the people of Devonport deserve to know what actually happened with Providore Place? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr Nevin. I'll put the motion. Those in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. Those against, please raise your hand. (29). The motion is lost. Thank you. Item 7.3 is a notice of motion from Mr Janney. Is Mr Janney here? Mr Janney is an apology. Can we put the motion? Is there anyone who would like to move the motion on behalf of Mr Janney? Mr Mobbs, thank you. As it sits? Okay, thank you. Moved by Mr Mobbs in Mr Janney's absence and seconded by Deputy Mayor Jarman. Would you like to speak to the motion, Mr Mobbs, please?
As President of the Senior Citizens Club, I do wear two hats. I think this is a very good motion. I think there are a number of self-funded retirees that are not eligible for the pensioner free parking. So I think it's an excellent motion and I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Jarman.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's an excellent notice of motion. I think it's about time we certainly could thank our ratepayers of over 50 years in a certain way. Certainly we have a wonderful system for our pensioners, for the parking voucher system. We used to have something for the independent retirees. We took it away. I would love to see it reinstated in this way. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Mr Mobbs, did you want to close? Nothing else to add? Thank you. I will put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against the motion? Three. Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you. It brings to a conclusion the notices of motion. There's now the opportunity, general business, opportunity for you to ask questions, make comment. I will remind you of the guidelines around the timeframes and ask you to step to the lectern and ask your question, make your comment. Thank you.
Rodney Russell, 225 Steele Street, Devonport. Page 16, workforce profile, male, female. As there are 90 male and 37 female full-time employee, can you give us some insight as to why there is 22 part-time female compared to 7 male and 14 casual female compared to 6 male? Just an insight if you have one.
The nature of the work and the fact that part-time does suit, or casual does suit women perhaps more than males, and the nature of the work. I'd love to see it 50-50, but that's not necessarily going to happen overnight. But it's the nature of the work that we can offer, I would suggest. I don't know whether the General Manager has anything to add to that.
No, Mayor, we haven't done any further analysis beyond
Thank
what
you.
you said.
Question 2, bus stop infrastructure. State government grant $430,000. Infrastructure contract works $368,000. Where will the balance money be spent?
Mr. Atkins,
Yes,
thank
through
you.
you, Mayor. Yeah, the amount that Mr. Russell quotes is the contract that was awarded to the contractor, and there'd be some other associated costs, project management, design costs. I don't have all those on hand, but there'd be some other costs that would make up that total budget of 430.
Thank you. Page 58, waivers relating to COVID-19. Commercial properties, rent relief, $84,000. What percentage of monthly rent was waived for the tenants?
Mr. Atkins?
Was it full or half? Or?
Yes, through you, Mayor. Look, it did vary significantly from tenant to tenant. For some it was zero, and for others there were short periods where it was 100%. So the percentage ranged from 0 to 100. Certainly the most common was probably 50%, but there was a range of 0 to 100.
Thank you. Is it 3 questions or more?
Do you have more questions?
Oh, just a small one.
Go ahead while you're there.
Financial report, page 3. Why was the print for the sentence at the bottom of the page so very small? You could very, very small.
Page 3 of the
financial report.
Of the audited financials.
Yeah. It can be read, but it's very small.
Conceded. Noted. Thank you. Were there any other questions? Comment? Ms. Clare? Mr. Gardam, I'd ask you to keep your seat, please, given the COVID restrictions we currently have. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gardam. Sorry, Ms. Clare.
Jenny Clare, ratepayer of Devonport. My question relates to procedures. At last year's annual general meeting, the Mayor stated that motions put to the meeting by the public which were passed would be considered at the next ordinary meeting of Council. There were 4 such motions last year, and my question tonight concerns what happened to those 4 motions at the next Council meeting. The words "must be considered at the next Council meeting" surely means that discussion of the motions by councillors would take place at that meeting. And indeed, one of the councillors at the time felt that and stated the same. Yet the resolution in question says that council had already considered the 4 motions. That was the wording of the resolution, thereby ignoring the requirements of the Local Government Act. Further, the resolution excluded 2 of the motions and required councillors to vote only on the other 2 and to vote on the other 2 as a package. To meet the requirements of the Act, shouldn't all of the motions have been presented and dealt with individually and voted on individually? Councillors were in effect restricted by the wording of the resolution, yet it is councillors, not staff, who the people of Devonport have voted in to make decisions on their behalf. So my question is, will council take steps to ensure that, as required by the Local Government Act, motions which pass at this meeting, and this is a moot point now, will be discussed by councillors at, not prior to, the next council meeting, with each motion being discussed and voted on separately?
As you've said, Ms Clare, there is one motion. I'll ask the General Manager if he wants to comment. However, I would make the point that we do have the opportunity to discuss items at a workshop, but the decisions are made at council.
But it said that the Act says that the items have to be considered at the council meeting.
Thank you. Yep,
and the resolution said, I'm just restating it because you've questioned what I said. So if you would allow me to restate it, the resolution said, this is a direct quote, the motions have already been considered. Already been considered.
Through you, Mayor, if I can just answer that one. Yeah, I just brought the motion up on Council's website. It wasn't those words. It said, having considered the 4 motions, Council then went on to resolve 2 steps in regard to 2 of the motions. So we're comfortable that the correct process was followed. The 2019 AGM was held, I think, late November, or early December, sorry, and the requirement is that any motions passed are then tabled for consideration at the next available council meeting. That occurred at the December meeting. The report's there on the website for anyone to look at, and I'm confident that that report met the requirements of the Local Government Act and provided those motions for council's consideration.
Thank you. Did you have any further questions?
I do. My second question is regarding, well, I'll just start it off. At the March meeting, Council provided additional delegation to the General Manager to ensure continuity of business during the COVID pandemic. This included the ability to approve planning applications which otherwise would have gone to the Planning Authority Committee or perhaps to a council meeting. There were 6 applications approved under this delegation, including the Stony Rise Road Friend Street application. It is the Stony Rise Friend Street DA which is of concern for a couple of reasons. One is that the General Manager has informed me that there was no environmental assessment done of the land, although it is thought to have endangered vegetation and wildlife present. Another is that the passing of a DA in this manner means that the details of the DA are not available in the minutes of a council meeting as they would be if it was passed at a meeting. The public cannot view it unless they are prepared to put in an RTI request to council. There was one representation regarding this development, which would normally mean that the DA would be required to go to a council meeting. However, this requirement was waived due to the state of emergency caused by the pandemic. When asked if the council could add this DA to a council meeting agenda so it would be available to the public who might want to have a look at a big development, the answer was no. With the technology available, our councillors, to their credit, did not miss a single council meeting. Yet the Planning Authority Committee apparently was unable to meet its obligations in regard to meetings and to deal with at least the Stony Rise Friend Street DA, which was large, contentious, and had attracted one representation. So my question tonight is, in the interests of transparency and good governance, will the Council undertake in future to ensure that all large DAs are put before the Council or the Planning Authority Committee? Unless, of course, there was some extremely drastic situation, but, you know.
Thank you. We'll take that on notice. Oh, Mr Atkins is prepared to respond.
Yeah, it gets through you, Mayor. Future delegations from the Council to the General Manager, obviously a call for Council at the appropriate time, but in reference to the application that Ms Clare mentions, Council made the decision during COVID to allow business to continue as much as possible and provided those additional delegations, so there wasn't delays in approving development applications. It is fair to say that the delegation provided was hardly extreme. It was certainly a practice that it was advertised. It was advertised for a 14-day period. It received one representation. Some councils delegate that to officers, others have a planning committee. This council in the past, in years gone by, had previously allowed applications with up to 3 representations to be decided by officers. So certainly the delegation that council provided certainly wasn't extreme and was done at a period when council felt it was important to progress development as quickly as possible and not to cause unnecessary delay.
Why would there have been a delay?
Did you have a further question?
Could I just ask why there would have been a delay? Why would there have been a delay if the Planning Authority Committee had done it?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Council quickly put those delegations in place, felt that was an easier way and a quicker way to do that with the restrictions and I guess the moving feast that was COVID at the time. We were still waiting on the government to bring in regulations to actually allow council to meet remotely, so that required changes to the Local Government Act, and in the interests of allowing business to continue, they made that decision.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have a further question?
I do. This question relates to the way that some questions that have been put to the Mayor at council meetings have received an answer such as the following. The Mayor advised that there is a report later in the meeting where we will deal with that. Thank you. So what I'm saying here is that when a question is asked, sometimes that is the answer. It's going to be part of a motion later in the meeting or a recommendation, and it will be dealt with then. That was a response at the December 16, 2019 council meeting to a question of mine. As it happened, my question was not discussed, let alone answered at that agenda item, because that was the item where the 4 motions, only 2 were even included that I mentioned in the first question. And I've seen numerous other questions which have been asked by the public sidestepped in this manner. So my question tonight is this. Does everyone understand what I'm talking about? That is the answer given to the question, that it will be answered later in the meeting when that item is discussed. And then when the item comes along and is discussed, it isn't answered. Because quite often there's very little discussion.
Claire, I'll respond. Your question is?
So the question is, on occasions where it is said a question will be answered when the relevant item arises during the meeting, can steps be taken to ensure that it is answered? And if it's not answered, can that question be automatically placed as a question without notice on the agenda of the next council meeting and not be counted as part of that person's 3 questions for the next meeting?
It can certainly be a question without notice. However, I would just clarify that usually it's practice that we do not discuss in question time items that are on the agenda. I don't think I say that the question will be answered. I think that the item will be discussed. If I've said that, then that's obviously not quite correct. The item that will be discussed later in the meeting, and it's general practice that we don't take questions around items that will be on the agenda at that meeting.
So, well, the result of that then is that the question doesn't get answered.
That's true.
And is that in the interest of good governance and transparency?
Well, you had the opportunity to put questions once a question on notice or a question in writing, but given that there is an item for discussion that council has to rule on, generally it's accepted that we don't make comment or comment about that in question time.
Right. It did. The wording is that we will deal with that.
I understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Gardam.
Madam Chair, I've got a few comments, and interspersed in those are probably 3 or 4 questions along the way. So, firstly, I wish to comment on the annual general meeting guidelines, which were first disclosed publicly in full on page 4 of tonight's agenda. The public had not seen them prior to that. Now, when questioned about the notice of AGM dated 24th of the 10th, 20, inclusion of the statement that motions from the floor will not be accepted, the General Manager stated, "It is certainly a practice that some other councils follow, and it's a practice that the Director of Local Government is comfortable with." When questioned in the current AGM agenda as to will council provide a list of other councils that enforce the practice of not allowing motions from the floor at AGMs, and will council provide evidence that the Director of Local Government at the time the decision was made was comfortable with the practice, the GM response recorded in the agenda, which you've probably got, is council has not done extensive review of the practices of other councils. However, we are aware of some councils which follow a similar approach. The General Manager's earlier statement was also reported in today's Advocate. My question is, and I ask the General Manager again, through you, Madam Chair, which are the some councils that follow a similar approach that you stated you were aware of?
Do you want to take?
Yeah, I can answer that, Mayor, through you. Yes, certainly we sought advice from the Local Government Division, and part of that reply said that it's a practice that some councils follow, and they referred us to the website of one particular council. But regardless of what other councils do, we're comfortable with the approach and felt that it gave the community to see what was on the agenda and what the motions were that were going to be debated at this AGM.
Didn't apply to Mr Vellicott's motion, I'm afraid. A further question. You said you were directed to a council's website. I now ask the General Manager again, through you, Madam Chair, as to which councils you contacted to validate the statement.
Asked and answered, Mr. Gardam. Move on.
No. It is a
Gardam,
practice
please.
that some other councils follow.
Thank you. Move on.
Well, Madam Chair, you said you didn't do extensive research or review. Well, I did. I rang 28 councils. And as of today's date, 26 have responded that they accept motions from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Gardam. We appreciate your diligence. Was there anything else?
Yes, Madam Chair, there is. Am I commenting here or not? Well, thank you.
You have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't have thought so at the moment. So, when asked about that, it was undertaken through consultation with the Mayor. In summary, and I'm talking about the guidelines, these guidelines that we've got here for conducting no motions from the floor. In summary, and on Council's pretext of openness and transparency, the GM and Mayor took it upon themselves to, 1, introduce mandatory rules under the guise of guidelines, which are never mandatory, but in the case include such words as must be and will not be accepted. 2, undertake no community consultation whatsoever prior to disclosing said guidelines in tonight's agenda. Make false or misleading representations as to being aware that no motions from the floor are accepted as a requirement of some other councils. In enforcing this ad hoc last-minute disclosure, denied electors the opportunity to review, comment and question the whole of the guidelines in advance of tonight, with the mandated deadline for AGM motions being passed by the time the disclosure of the full content surfaced. And even if the requirements prove to be technically lawful, they are certainly not in the spirit of the Act and trashes an elector's democratic right to freely participate in the AGM. Now, it must be remembered that the GM and the Mayor are the same duo that tried to defend the Mayor's premature closure of last year's AGM by offering no less than 7 reasons that the Mayor had authority to close that meeting. Whereas Chair, the Mayor refused to take a previously flagged ratepayer motion and subsequently closed it around a ratepayer who had contacted the Mayor. The Code of Conduct panel reduced the 9 reasons offered for closing the meeting over and around a ratepayer to the status of excuses, and it was likely and found that it was likely the Mayor likely closed the meeting to avoid, in her mind, perceived personal embarrassment. I put it to the meeting that banning motions without notice from the floor appears to be an extension of the same motivation. Question. The Code of Conduct report included in relation to last year's AGM that the panel heard that the Mayor considered that the meeting was getting a bit out of control, and it was one of her reasons for closing it quickly. But then stated the panel finds that on this count, the decision to refuse any more motions was not made objectively, considering the merit of the way in which the members of the public were conducting themselves at the meeting. Accordingly, I asked for the benefit of many here tonight that attended last year, a question of the Mayor, or a question that the Mayor has refused to answer previously, in that, Mayor, just who or what was getting a bit out of control last year?
Mr Gardam, I've already gone through an extensive Code of Conduct panel hearing. I've apologised for my decision that I made last year, and I have nothing else to add. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to say that the behaviour of the... The behaviour of the public gallery last year was exemplary, considering your actions as chairperson. And so in the absence of... We'll conclude it really.
Thank you. Thank you. That's enough. Thank you. I've given
I commend the gallery last year for their behaviour. I do have a couple of...
I'm giving you a lot of latitude here.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions here. They're quite easy, these ones. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that latitude. I appreciate that. It's not always easy, but sometimes there are questions to be asked. People want them asked and people want them answered. Can I ask, why were the items within the attachment to the agenda tonight not included in the agenda handout as such? Surely the page count was not greater than that we hand out for ordinary meetings during the whole of the year. So, you know, the attachments were not part of the handouts.
Mr Atkins?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Look, the agenda was run in the same way as the last council meeting agenda was. So there's the document that includes the agenda, and then the attachments are a separate document. Both of those documents are available on the website and were available for this meeting.
Okay, so that's the common practice now. Yep. And just one last question. In this agenda, I previously asked, will Council please provide the individual fair value book entries on the asset register for the following Living City premises? I'll read them out in a minute. And the response was, the information is not readily available in the requested format. These properties include multiple individual assets across several asset classes, and it would require resources that are currently unavailable to calculate the answers requested. So I'd like to pose this question, and it'll be taken on notice, and that's fine. I'd like to ask, will Council please provide the individual fair value book entries for each of the following properties for the combined land and buildings for these items listed below. And the properties that I'd like to know what is the carrying value for the land and the property and the buildings are for 6 to 10 Steele Street, the former Webster building, 17 Fenton Way, the current Harris Scarf site, 21 Oldacre Street, the former State Link Library site, 137 Rook Street that we're standing in, 17 Oldacre Street was Providore Place over there, and 4048 Best Street, which is the multi-level car park up there. So I'll formulate something for Jackie and send that through in the written word. So I do thank you for your tolerance, and I thank the gallery for their tolerance.
Thank you, Mr. Gardam.
And
Mr.
thank you.
Atkins has a response.
Through you, Mayor, I can just clarify that question. Mr. Gardam's questions and submissions for the annual report. I think the last one was received at about 1 a.m. Wednesday morning, came in late Tuesday night. There was 41 questions, I think, in total, which were all answered on Tuesday and Wednesday to allow the agenda to be put out that Wednesday night. So the one question that you said hasn't been answered, it was simply the resources required to follow that up, and that's to do with the asset values and I guess just to correct that for the record, there's been a lot of talk about the asset values and incorrectly referencing the value of Providore Place against the asset values and saying that's somehow a loss. That book asset value is council's required to carry the building at that amount under the Australian accounting standards, whether we agree with it or not, that we had to follow those standards, and that's what's in the financial statements, and that's what we've been audited on.
Thank you for that, General Manager. That does bring me to one other question that has raised through the answer, and that is the timing factor, that the council had so little time from releasing from the notice and the deadline for submissions. Last year at the AGM, there was a motion put by Mr. Janney, and it was successful, and that was we would take the time for submissions from 28 days back to 14 days. And this year, for some reason, we had a bit of an unhealthy haste, and I think we ended up with about 8 days from the time you could get your hands on a hard copy of the annual report to make a submission. So I'd say I feel for you in having to answer 41 questions, but it was your decision that you'd only give us until tonight and effectively about 8 days to make submissions, when you could have had this next Monday night and you would have gave yourself time to, and the people to also put submissions in, and could have, probably extended.
Thank you, Mr. Garland.
Thank you very much.
Were there any other comments, questions? Mr. Stegman.
Peter Stegman, 118 River Road, East Devonport, or Ambleside. Currently, council have a number of staff working from home. How many staff are working from home currently? Have you got that? Is that a hard question?
Some are doing both.
Pardon?
Some staff are doing both, so it varies from day to day.
Right, because I rang the planning department on Friday, and someone said, all the staff are working from home, and someone would get back to me. Well, I had to ring again this morning, tell them that it was getting rather urgent because I had a time frame to get a submission in, and I was pleased that they did get back, but I was just wondering when staff are coming back into the office again, because I would have thought that would have been appropriate and would be easier to work with the staff in the office rather than being remotely operating, especially with planning when you've got to discuss things.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen.
Have you got a time frame when they're coming back?
Look, through you, Mayor, there's not a direct connection between our staff, whether they're working at home or based in the office down below, shouldn't impact on the response time. So I don't.
So we'll accept.
Well, I was told that I could wait for 3 days. They try to respond within 3 days. When I ring up Ulverston for a similar thing, I get directly on to someone and get an answer immediately.
Thank you. Your comments noted. Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions? In that case, I'll call the meeting. Oh, Mr. Bellicott.
Yes, my question, Mayor, is that will Council review the decree that at the Devonport City Council Annual General Meeting motions from the floor will not be accepted, and that a notice of any motion must be given by a certain date? I believe this is in breach of the long-standing basic democratic right and a convention that has allowed electors who have attended annual general meetings to move relevant lawful motions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take it on notice. Are there any other comments, questions? In that case, I will call the meeting to a close at 7:29. I thank you all for your patience. I also want to thank everyone for attending tonight. We as Council appreciate the support and appreciate the comments, all of them negative and positive. We accept them and take them on board. I'd like to particularly thank the General Manager and his staff for their support and for the hard work that they've put in over a very difficult period of time. Like the councillors, thank the councillors for their support over the 12 months. Personally, it's been an interesting year, and I thank you again for taking part in this meeting. Look forward to a bigger and better 2021. Thank you, everyone.